Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneurial Mindset. Today, actually, we are lucky. We have an amazing entrepreneur, investor, engineer. Finally, I get to have somebody who's also an engineer. We can talk the nerdy stuff. There we go. Don Fotsch. Don is one of the early members of the Apple team, and looking at the students, I'm talking mid-1980s, by the way. He has been an investor. He has, after that, been a founder, doing a lot of stuff in AI. And the reason he's here is because he is single-handedly decided to help build the Arizona entrepreneurial ecosystem. And then you have people like me who just kind of hold on to his coattail and say, Don, how can we help? So without further ado, what I would like to do is to introduce Don. And if you were to tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll get into some of the gnarly questions.
Sure. So a bit about myself. So first of all, I got to Arizona about 4 years ago.
Okay.
But quick summary, I guess the quick life summary. So I'm one of 8 children, 6 brothers, 1 sister, 4 engineers, 2 doctors, a dentist, and an accountant.
Oh, my.
As we like to say, Dad wasn't big on lawyers. Nothing against the lawyers, just, But grew up was born in the shadow of the Golden Dome in South Bend, Indiana. So for all the Domer fans out there, it was a tough loss on the national championship, but we'll be back. Don't worry. And so when I was 5, and I'm number 6 of the 8, when I was 5, we moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My dad ran a machine tool business, sold to like Cummins Engine, big engine companies, big ag companies were customers, etc. Custom machine tools. And all of us went to Marquette University. Back in those days, for the oldsters, maybe and the youngsters out there. Back in those days, if you could believe it, there was actually a volume discount on tuition, right? So some things have changed. But anyway, so mechanical engineer out of Marquette. First job was at John Deere, actually an internship over a summer, which we'll get to the importance of internships a little later. But at John Deere, my first job was as a manufacturing engineer at John Deere. 4 years at John Deere, was doing an MBA right away after I started my first job. Knew I wanted to kind of get the MBA. Was benefiting from the fact that I had older siblings who kind of did the engineering plus the business mix, right? And finished up full-time at Northwestern at the Kellogg School and was pretty intent to go back to John Deere, as my dad would say, help feed the world with great equipment. And this fruit company called Apple came on campus at Kellogg at the Northwestern Business School. And they're like, hey, we're changing the world one person at a time. Yeah. And so I was like, change the world, feed the world. I don't know. Change the world sounds pretty interesting, particularly if you're in Wisconsin in the Midwest and you're enduring the winters. Okay. Which, I grew up in the Midwest, so that wasn't so bad. But Kate and I got married in 1987, took the opportunity out at Apple, and actually started in supply chain. And manufacturing engineering. And interestingly, talk about the world is a small place. The week before I went out for interviews at Apple, the plant superintendent from the factory at John Deere that I was working at had just been out to Apple the week prior to talk about best practices in manufacturing.
So to all the students who are listening, when I tell you that the future CEOs are going to be from supply chain, ta-da!
There you go. In fact, I got to tell you this quick digression. I'll get a little shameless plug for one of the companies I'm helping. So the leading company, young company called Savaro in neurological care, which basically provides certified neurologist hospital on a video, basically a teleneurology basis. To your point, the doctor who started that, and now it's doing very well, very profitable, growing handsomely, about 100 people, about 80 of them are doctors. And I am thinking of this because when he started his teleneurology practice, he was learning from a doctor at UC San Diego who was the first doctor to ever do teleneurology. And he said, Don, I was on campus talking to all these doctors about the importance of the layout of the hospital as it relates to the speed of getting care, to the patient, particularly a stroke, every second counts. He said, for the life of me, I could not get the doctors to understand that like having the MRI 3 floors up, okay, from the emergency room was going to add to the cycle times, okay? He says, I go across campus to the logistics folks, supply chain. They totally got it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get off track, but, there you go. A lot of importance in logistics and supply chain.
So after all of that, what brought you from the cold mid of the country to Arizona?
Okay, so we got here about 4 years ago. Okay. Our last of 6 children. So we're blessed with 6 children, 4 girls, 2 boys, and they're basically all nerds. Some data analysts, some product managers, some more hardcore engineers, some coders, et cetera. And when the last one headed off to college, we were in Winnetka, Illinois, a little north of Chicago. And Kate said, we need to find the sun. Okay, so I'm tired of 4 months of gray. Okay, and for those who know the kind of the Midwest tendencies, for whatever reason, Wisconsin people tend to, if anything, go a little more west to places like Arizona. And Illinois people tend to be a little more toward like Florida.
Yeah.
Okay. But as my dad would say, that in the Fotsch DNA, there's a very efficient cooling system, okay, which means we sweat a lot, which my daughters in particular are not fond of. Okay, so we're like, okay, we're going to find the sun. We're not going to Florida, too humid, okay, and we love California, and frankly, we'd be in California were not for the fact that California, I would just say, business environment.
Yeah.
Government regulation, et cetera, is frankly just not business friendly, particularly if you have a diverse set of industries like we have here in Arizona. And to me, the most important thing that I've learned since coming to Arizona and living to Arizona is that Arizona has, I would say, increasingly a humble yet unapologetic roots in being a values-based place.
But leading to that, values as a foundation, absolutely
Yes.
agree with you. You could have gone into any industry and said, I would like to make an impact.
Yeah.
You made a conscious decision to go focus and start to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah.
Don, by the way, is founder of the AZ Nerd Network. For many of you who don't know, you can do a search. You'll see he's bringing in founders as a networking event, but he's doing much more than that. Why not a large corporate? Why not into defense production? What did you see when you saw Arizona and said, this is right for entrepreneurial?
Yeah. So when we got here, I'm still spending. I very consciously said, okay, I'm going to spend half my time building a few, which I am, applied AI companies, because there's tremendous amount of opportunity for those of us who love to work with atoms and bits, more commonly said hardware and software. There's huge. You can listen to Peter Thiel if you like, but many people out there, like we've, particularly in the U.S. and particularly in Silicon Valley, it's kind of shifted a lot over the last few decades to, frankly, only software or mostly software, right?
Yeah.
And yet, as Peter Thiel says this, I think it's dead on. While the phones that we use are crazy better than they were, several years ago, even a handful of years ago, the planes that we fly in aren't that much better. The trains that we ride in aren't that much better. The buses that So a lot of those things are now being addressed with AI. So back to the kind of core question. So when we got here, I'm looking around and I'm saying, hey, we've got supportive government. We've got an incredible place that people want to live. We've got the talent. Why are there not more big companies, particularly tech-enabled companies that have grown up here? And what I found, which is just, frankly, to me, it's hilarious. But being an engineer and being curious, it didn't take me long to realize that some people would say, well, we don't have money and we don't have experienced talent and we don't have, bigger companies to learn from and we don't have this and sometimes the sky really isn't blue and, all this stuff. And I'm just like, and then what I realized, and this was frankly kind of a little bit of the epiphany, is no offense to any of these people, but like when you said, hey, Don's an engineer, it's nice to be engineer, right? Is I realized that everybody I was talking to, and it's incredibly welcoming state. They're like, you go to Illinois, Chicago, and say, hey, I'd like to meet the governor, the previous governor, and go have a coffee. I just did that with Doug Ducey, by the way, our previous governor. Do a fair amount of work, as you do, with our Arizona Commerce Authority, the entity that brings big companies in to the state. And I realized that literally none of them are technical.
Yeah.
Like literally none. In a state where we graduate across the state comfortably over 10,000 engineers a year, 7,000 of which come out of ASU. And so I'm sitting there, this makes no sense to me. Okay? So I'm just like, being curious, I'm like, okay, so I start talking to, founders and getting to meet people and so on and so forth. And the fast forward was one of the founders, a gentleman named Josh Su, another one who's doing a very promising startup, Axio, Mark Knopfel, who ran Luminosity Labs here at ASU for years. They are like, Josh in particular said, Don, we just got to round up the rich people and round up the nerds. And I said, well, my experience is that if you round up the nerds and the nerds do really compelling work, important for the world and something you can make a business out of, the people with the money will find them. They'll follow.
Yep.
So the scarce thing, when you have no money, of course you think, and it's true, money's scarce. But if you have when you're a builder, you learn that the most scarce thing, for example, using SpaceX, right? The most scarce thing is the engineers can't figure out how to get the rocket to get the thing into orbit and come back down and land. So we've got a reusable part.
Yeah.
Right. So when Josh said that, I said, okay, well, why don't we just have a few of them over? Like, let's just get going.
Yeah.
How about the Arizona Nerd Network? So we started the Arizona Nerd Network literally 1 year ago, February 23rd, I think it was, 2024. And there were about 20 people, 20 nerds that, Josh knew, and a few other people came over. And we just do pizza and water. It's the desert, so we got to keep people hydrated. And it's literally just to create the space where technical builders in particular, but more broadly just kind of builders, product managers, designers, engineers, coders, people at bend metal, program CNC machines, all this stuff, right? Aeronautical engineering, aerospace, defense, a lot of people, of course, from that are currently like masters or PhD and things here at ASU. And so people came over, and here we are a year later. We have another Nerd Network coming up on Saturday, and we have 370 people in the Nerd Network, and you don't pay. And the only way you get in is through somebody else just saying, "Hey, this person should be in. Here's their phone number."
Yeah.
Right.
And that you bring up a very interesting point. This next Nerd Network, this will be the second time ASU is hosting the Nerd Network. You talked about it, 10,000 engineers. ASU is a huge foundation in Arizona. In your opinion, based upon coming from the outside, what else could ASU do that ASU has not done in the past to help create this vision of the entrepreneurial, or I call it Silicon Valley 2.0.
Yeah.
Not the same as Silicon Valley, but then bigger, better version, a different version of it. What can we do?
So I was curious after you in particular inspired my thinking about Silicon Valley 2.0, like the Peter Thiel, like don't try to be somebody else, no offense to that, because I think it helps get people thinking the right way. But I was like, we're going to be the first Silicon state. We're applying technology across all kinds of industries.
Yeah.
And so I looked it up. I looked up the URL. Nobody had taken it.
And you took it.
So I took it. So just when the time comes, we got it. Right?
Talk about ASU.
Yeah. So specifically on ASU, here's what I would say. If Michael Crow called me in tomorrow and granted me one wish, says, okay, I'll give you one wish, and your one wish, Don, has to be an accelerating factor in getting us to the first values-based economy that achieves prosperity for all, where literally everybody works, most for pay, because they have bills to pay. Many, like myself, take maybe half of their time, and they work pro bono or for free because they love Arizona. Okay? We like to say, as people, as students, all of love, love your neighbor, etc. The most powerful form of love involves sacrifice, to do something for someone else, expecting nothing in return. So to come back to the, if I had that time with Michael Crow, I would say, I would ask him to make it a requirement that to earn a degree of any degree, but I would start with engineering and business, and say, in order to earn the degree, you must have at least one internship in order to qualify for the degree and
Why
to
do you
get
say that?
graduation. So my personal bias is the reason I would be like, hey, Michael Crow, here's my just thoughts on this, is that if we could, as I like to say, if all it took to execute that was to hit a button, and every start with engineering and business degree graduate had at least one internship, frankly, preferably two, and once they have one, they often get a second, like after the sophomore and then the junior year. What would happen is, first, it would cause us to get more engagement between the ASUs, the U of A's, the NAUs, GCU, and our big companies, okay, which is really important. And those two things are also essential as it relates to building entrepreneurship, in the economy, right? Because
Talk to me more about how that will help in starting new companies in the state.
The part that kind of doesn't make any sense is, okay, if we're graduating 10,000 engineers a year across, it's more than that, but across our universities, how could it ever be the case, unless they're literally all leaving the state, which they can't possibly all be leaving the state. There's a lot of people from outside the country, et cetera. But if I was in Michael's shoes, I would go get that. I would go get those numbers. I'd figure out where are they all going and figure out across our universities, collaborate with the other ones, with ABOR and so forth. And I would take that team and say, let's look at this data and say, if you want to do one single thing that we have the power to do here, okay, that will cause more companies to be created, and importantly, more companies when it's time to scale, to be able to scale really effectively here, which is basically that's the bigger reason, frankly, that we started the Nerd Network. Okay. Because yes, you need technical people to start, but as you know from your experience, where it's really hard is when you actually have nailed it, your product market fit is really strong, and now you've got to scale. Yeah. And this is why we built the Nerd Network. The only thing better than finding and hiring the people who can do the job is finding and hiring the people who can do the job who you already know. Yeah. Which is the way Silicon Valley works, Austin works, and frankly, it works a fair amount around here. People just don't tend to know it as well.
A lot of people complain here that we don't have investors in this state, and that's the reason we couldn't start anything, and so on and so forth. Look at Silicon Valley. So they are like investors galore. What did you tell those guys?
Yeah, so it's. I love the fact that you asked that question because I have So I just happened to have. This was not staged. This is just a very good, very good interviewer here. Very, very qualified. You can tell he's an operator. Okay, so I happened to bring to this conversation this short article, which we can make available along with the podcast. It's literally just like 5 pages. It's a very short article, okay? But it's from April of 2023, end of April 2023. And here it is. It's, what's the website? Basically, semiconductor history is the category. Okay. And the headline of the story is the story of Silicon Valley, how it began, how it boomed, and where it's headed. Okay? Because all of us like to think when we're whining, when we're giving feedback, about why we aren't doing better in Arizona, right? It was like, well, we have no money, we have no talent, everybody leaves, and they shot my dog, It's like, but that's the way humans are, right? And so I've been saying with some of the things that, like Anduril was one of the things that we're involved in, and I personally have now come to understand that between us, we didn't really have a chance on that for some common reasons, which have to do with where did the co-founders grow up. It turns out that things like that are actually quite relevant. And I know because I was involved in things like that at PayPal when we chose Austin. And frankly, it had nothing to do with Austin being a great tech place, which it was. It had to do with twins that we could never get to come to California to work for PayPal. So we opened the office there finally and we hired them. Okay. But here's the paragraph I just want to share, because this is back to your point of, we don't have this, we don't have that. And it makes me wonder, I wonder if it was always just everybody who's a genius always wanted to work in Silicon Valley. So I happened to, fortunately, find this article. Here's the paragraph I just want to share. Many historians attribute the start of the growth of Silicon Valley to another prominent Stanford University figure, Frederick Terman. After a decade of turning the electrical engineering department of Stanford into a world-class research facility, Terman became frustrated upon seeing students leave the Santa Clara Valley area as soon as they had graduated. To encourage graduates to stay in the valley, Terman invested heavily in businesses that would base themselves in the area and employ talented young people. One such business was the original startup, an electrical company started in a garage by Stanford alumni William Hewlett and David Packard, otherwise known as HP.
HP, yeah.
So there's the reason I appreciate
he
you.
brought in companies that can hire students out of Stanford to stay in that area.
Correct.
Okay.
And this is why, if I only got one wish with people like a Michael Crow, it's just like, there's a saying, attributed to Steve Jobs: good artists copy, great artists steal. We don't have to steal. We just have to copy.
That brings up a very interesting point. So if you were, in your mind, there is a vision of what Arizona ecosystem could look like. We can call it Silicon Valley 2.0 or Silicon Desert. There are many terms that float around. Let's say it's the Silicon State, which you have now.
We got the URL.
Let's assume the Silicon State. What would your vision be for the Silicon State when it's firing on all the cylinders?
Right. There's also a famous story, just quickly, of Steve Jobs talking to Larry Ellison, who ran and started Oracle for years. And they're very good friends. And they're talking after Steve went back to Apple. And they say, and Larry's like, no, Steve, you got it. Like, here's the financial engineering you need to do. Because if you do it this way as opposed to this way, now that you're back at Apple, you'll make way more money. They stop right there in the walk. Okay, and Steve puts his hand on Larry's shoulders. And he says, Larry, you have more money already than you could ever have imagined. It's not about the money. Okay, so now let's come back to Arizona. So my belief is that we are literally at the beginning of what may well be the most significant values-based economic surge in my lifetime. And my great-grandma lived to 105. So Kate and I are 64, so we got hopefully a little ways to go. And it's been a few decades, but hopefully we got a few more decades. But it's very clear to me that that's what we're in the middle of. And if we care enough, right, if we love our country, and in this case, like our state, enough that we all kind of study it and understand we have this blessing called Arizona values, and that's what makes us unique, then we can, I think, be one of the handful, and maybe the light on the hill state that shows the way to what does prosperity for all in a state mean. And to me, what it fundamentally means, because I've been asked this question as I've been talking to people, I'm like, guys, we can be the first values-based economy that achieves prosperity for all, which, among other things, means we don't need the government to take care of people. Now, why not? Because when everybody, if you talk to people like in my age group, 60, 70, or whatever, and you'll hear people say, like, oh, I'm finally at the point, like, I don't have to work with people I don't like, and I'm going to golf, for every day. Okay. And then you see them 2 months later. Oh, my God. I was the most miserable person because, there's no purpose in that. I got nothing against golf. I think golf's a great game. It's very important to Arizona, by the way. But the point is that people want to get out of bed and go have a day that has meaning. Okay. Right. So I think that when you look at technology, and this is like a direct quote from a local web shop tech owner, who recently said to me, he said, I had just met him, he's helping us with the website we're going to use for Hackazona, the first industry-based hackathon we're going to start in early 2026. But back to the question. He says, just as I'm meeting him, nice guy named Anthony, and he jokes, he says, well, Don, it's tech. And in tech, there's two things you don't have. You don't have sports fans, and you don't have people of faith. And I leaned we're on a Zoom, and I leaned into the camera. I said, Anthony, but not in Arizona. So, when you come back to our economy, I think when we anchor on that, then you look at Arizona, and you probably know this, there's basically, you could argue, 8 to 10 core industries in the state, including things like mining, for example, that a lot of people have no idea that we're involved in, let alone a leader in. And so to me, when you look at all the talent that we're educating, right, and then you look at the various companies in a variety of industries, the potential to have a values-based economy that achieves prosperity for all, the reason I obsess about this, even though it may not seem like it's quite on point to the question, is if you look at Elon, if you look at Palmer, if you look at Grace Hopper, if you look at Steve Jobs, the point is they were aiming at something beyond the numbers thing. And the numbers that nobody could have imagined they could achieve came along because they did not compromise on what they believed the North Star was.
Very interesting. So this kind of
hopefully that's helpful.
No, that's very, very helpful. It's a very different interview I have done. It's a lot to not only food for the mind, but also for the soul, the Arizona soul.
There you
go. That leads me to my last question.
Yeah.
What do you worry about? What could go wrong?
In a nutshell, what I would say is speed/collaboration.
Okay.
If we actually knew, and this is why I say I believe strongly that our biggest opportunity is as a state, and it's the people who are here who love it here and who do things for free because they love it here. And the people who come, many of whom like to stay quiet about it because they don't want other people to know about Arizona, who they look at it and they say, oh my gosh, like I did, the opportunity here is as a state. This is the first place. And I'm like, guys, it's like we're only 12. You know, we're a young state. One of the guys, related not just to these worries, right? So in a nutshell, I would just say speed and collaboration.
Okay.
Because I believe that the things that are in our way, if you use the analogy of, you know, how fast can we run the race? Lack of collaboration, lack of being on the same values, lack of being on the same goals, okay, is like hurdles on the track. So the more we can get the hurdles off, the faster we can go together. You know, so that's, I frankly worry, to be honest. I bitch about that at times. I try to not. I try to focus more on where we do it well. Yeah. So if you look at like when we won TSMC, that was 10 years, a little more than that, in the making. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what I don't really tend to worry about much, but the thing I think about is what can we do to move faster together, which is why I really appreciate like your question about whether it's Michael Crow or the new president of U of A, or, you know, these people like, I guess if I could greedily throw in one other thing to them in particular, I would say, you know, have a breakfast once a quarter and just come to people like me and ask me who's new, okay, in the state that you know, that's a builder that loves Arizona and that we should hear from because they came from somewhere else and they can give us insights that maybe we haven't heard. And probably the last point to wrap up on, related to all this and learning from those that are here as well as the new ones. Because, you know, it's often the kooks like me who come in, I don't know anything, but I'm like trying to listen and learn, who are like, well, why does it work that way? And, you know, on a related note, when you look at, like, I think I mentioned I had the pleasure of having a coffee with the previous governor, Doug Ducey, a couple of weeks ago. And he told me, I think it was 72%, but we'll just say the majority of people who live in Arizona today did not grow up here. And, you know, when you think about the parallel to the country, is it really so crazy? I think we're the number 18 GDP by state. 1, 3, and 5 are California, New York, and Illinois. Those are all dropping. So to me, like, we should be looking at how do we start climbing that leaderboard with this diverse set of industries. Yeah. You know, I think we're in a wonderful position. That's kind of the bottom line.
So that's straight from the heart. That's Don Fotsch for you. That's the reason every month I have either a cup of coffee, which he's a big fan of, or maybe some lunch. And our conversations, which is actually good for my soul too. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And we will see you guys soon with another exciting episode of Entrepreneurial Mindset.